Still squirreling those nuts.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to another episode of the Raw Prospect Podcast. Today we're going to continue our NFL preview series with our number 4 and number 3 teams in our power rankings. If you're unfamiliar with this series, we've been going through every single team, ranking them 20 all the way up to 1. So if you haven't already, go ahead and go back and find your team if they're somewhere in our rankings.
Yep.
And also, if you're new to this channel, be sure to subscribe, leave a like on the video as well. We really appreciate that. It really helps with our algorithm, helps push this video out to more football fans like yourself. But now to introduce my co-host, joining me as always, the Stat King himself, Mr. Michael Ween. How you doing, man?
I'm good. I'm really good. And it's getting real in the world of the NFL.
Getting real.
As I mentioned on the Texas football recruiting show that we just recorded, go check that out. Big commitment went down this weekend, and there's more coming here in the coming week, actually. We're done with the preseason. We got that out of the way. I think you would agree, and many football fans would agree, that once you get to week 3 in the last preseason game, people don't give a shit. I mean, They really don't. Aside from maybe seeing a couple of these rookie quarterbacks, if they're still playing, like a Drake May, people are done with it. Over the past 36, 48 hours, we've had teams cut down to their 53-man regular season rosters. And we've had some small trades and some notable waiver wire moves as well. So season starts in 8 days, and it's going to start with our number 4 team playing our number 1 team. That might give you guys a hint into how our rankings are going to finish, but I think you could guess it anyways. So let's go ahead and jump right in.
Yeah, let's do it. So our number 4 team is the Baltimore Ravens.
Yes, they are.
So to start with recapping the 2023 season, you could argue that the Ravens were the best team in football from beginning to end as like an overall product of your team. But that doesn't matter. It matters what you do in January, of course. So it was a disappointing ending to their season, losing at home to the Chiefs in a game where even though you didn't play well in a lot of specific areas, you still had a chance to win that game, which says a lot about the talent on that team. Just to be able to go out, bring your non-A game, and still be there at the end of the game with a chance against Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs. But none of that matters at the end of the day. They weren't able to get it done. They didn't end up, finishing it off. But that doesn't, change the fact that it was a fantastic season. And now they just have to do it all again. That's what makes it tough. And their coaching staff, we'll get into this in a little bit, their coaching staff was absolutely ravaged, especially on the defensive side of the ball.
Yes. Last year, this is what I'll add to what you said. Everything you said was spot on, but Lamar signed that $260 million contract. He answered, I think, a lot of the concerns about his durability, played all 16 games, won the MVP, his second MVP award in 6 seasons. By the way, the 2 guys that face off to start the season, the 2 quarterbacks at the very least, have won 4 of the last 6 MVPs, which is just ridiculous. The marriage of their new offensive coordinator, Todd Monken, who came from the college ranks, and Jackson proved for much of the season to be a smashing success. But in that AFC Championship game, and to the credit, of course, of that great Kansas City Chiefs defense, but also some issues on the Ravens end. They weren't able to really do what they had done all season in that game. They fell short in the AFC Championship game, which is, I'm sure, hurts Ravens fans because it was their first chance at hosting a conference title game in 53 years after such a great season, 13-4. But they couldn't end up getting over that hump. So now, as you mentioned, it's all about taking the next step in the postseason for Baltimore. After they finished, with the NFL's best record for the second time in 5 years, they've been really good and really consistent in the regular season. Now it's just about getting Lamar to that elusive Super Bowl, because he's really got almost everything else as a 27-year-old on his, resume as of right now. And he continues to get better year in and year out, and even just the little things. I have a lot of respect for the Baltimore Ravens, them as an organization, and the way that they run their operation in the offseason, especially, even though I am my team is the Baltimore Ravens' biggest rival. And so I'm not, of course, I respect them, but I also dislike them. But we'll be as objective as possible here in talking about them. Let's talk about their offseason. Do you want me to start us off, or do you want to go ahead?
Here I'll go ahead. I think the interesting part about this episode is with the four and the number three teams in our rankings. I'll just say it: the Ravens and the Niners. You could argue that both of them got worse, and that's not a common thing when you're ranking a team this high and you're arguing that they got worse. But they have questions along the offensive line. They're changing out, I think,
3 starters.
yeah, 3 starters, and of course the constant question of Ronnie Stanley's health at left tackle as well.
Yep.
And then in the secondary, they brought in Nate Wiggins at corner, has had an amazing preseason,
Yep.
but they are relying on him to be their new, you know, corner opposite Marlon Humphrey. So
Yep.
they've made a lot of changes in some key spots, but they're a team that deserves the benefit of the doubt with how they run things, as you mentioned. And I think come week 8, they'll get to a point where their offensive line is going to kind of get to at least a passable level where it doesn't keep them from doing what they want to do. And from that point on,
Yeah.
I think things will go as planned. But it'll just be the question of how good will they be in the first few weeks of the season with that new offensive line. It might be kind of rough.
Yes. The offensive line is definitely a concern, and in some ways can be turned into an X factor for the Baltimore Ravens once we get to that segment. But in terms of the off season, there were a lot of departures, but I would highlight 3 moves. Number one, and I like year after year, I pretty much, I think a lot of people end up really liking the Ravens drafts. That seems to be a pretty consistent theme over the last half decade at the very least. But love the Nate Wiggins pick. Absolutely loved it. I think he's one of the more physically gifted cornerbacks in the class. The athleticism and the stickiness to receivers downfield, I think, can translate right away at the NFL level. Over the past 2 years, he allowed a catch rate 24% below expected when covering explosive routes at the college level. Love Nate Wiggins as a prospect. I love that draft pick. I also liked, in kind of tandem with that, getting good value on a TJ Tampa in the 4th round. Tampa is a guy who lacks kind of the speed and the athletic traits of maybe a Nate Wiggins, but plays that physical style and really excels in zone coverage. and he's kind of a ball hawk. So I like both secondary young additions, injecting some youth into this secondary at need positions in the draft. But I'd more so highlight Nate Wiggins on that end. It's not a flashy move because it's just a re-signing, but they did end up re-signing their Pro Bowl defensive lineman Justin Matabike, who was a 5-star high school recruit out of the state of Texas, by the way. Signed a 4-year, $98 million extension. Like that move, he's kind of the guy on that defensive front. He's been a fantastic player for them. Led all defensive tackles with 13 sacks a year ago. That's the most sacks by a Baltimore Raven since Elvis Dumervil in 2014. So he's a fantastic player. Love re-signing him at such a value position. And then, you of course, have to mention bringing in Derrick Henry at running back. I think he just fits what the Ravens want to do offensively. I anticipate a big season for Henry. I think what he can do in the playoffs is what really matters. As kind of like a workhorse in those colder games in January. Running directly at teams. He's a hard guy to get on the ground in the backfield. He might not be like what he used to be 2 or 3 years ago, but he's still, very durable. And he'll help this offense. He'll help the offensive line with the way that he's able to stay on his feet, the contact balance, and everything else. Those would be the 3 moves I would highlight. They did end up losing a lot. I have the list here. We're not going to go through it all. But, Patrick Queen departs. They still have Roquan Smith, so you don't really necessarily worry about their depth at linebacker. But Jadeveon Clowney departs. Geno Stone departs. 3 offensive linemen are out the door that were starters for them a year ago. Kevin Zeitler, who we talked about in our last episode, he signed with the Lions. Morgan Moses goes to the Jets in a trade.
They chose to do that.
Odell Beckham is gone. So there were some veteran solid contributors that are out the door. Of course, have a reworked running back room as Gus Edwards is gone now. J.K. Dobbins is gone now. But overall, really like their draft. I think there are going to be some young guys that they're going to rely upon pretty early, which is a question mark for this team, such as Roger Rosengarten, who was a offensive lineman they drafted out of Washington in the 2nd round. With some of the losses on the offensive line, he could potentially be a guy that's asked to start right away. But overall, with Lamar Jackson and just the way that this operation runs, I still expect them to be a really good football team and compete for the AFC North Division title.
Right, exactly.
Anything else on their offseason before we get into X factors?
Well, I just think from a general sense, you're going to some youth here, but I think, and from my philosophy as a football fan, seeing team building, my view of it is it's just natural to, at certain positions, look to go young after a few years and not overpay B-level players. I think that's just good team building. That's good process. Now, whether or not the young guys step up and pay off right away, that's the big question. So I do agree with their process here, but it's not one that you typically see from a contender. That's why it's so off-putting. So it does lower their floor for me, but I still think their ceiling, as you mentioned, is right there at the top of the AFC and possibly in the Super Bowl.
Absolutely. So X factors. What are your top 1 or 2 X factors on each side of the ball for the Baltimore Ravens in 2024?
Well, first one for me is Rashad Bateman. Um,
I would agree with that one.
with Odell Beckham Jr. gone, he has to step up. He's in year 4. They gave him an extension rather than uh, accepting his 5th-year option and letting him become a free agent. They decided to extend him on our 2-year, $12 million deal, which isn't a ton of money, but they clearly still do believe in him as a player.
Yeah.
They wouldn't have, you know, not made any more moves at wide receiver if they didn't believe in Rashad Bateman. So it's a huge year for him. If he doesn't deliver, I still do like the depth that they have behind him, but it does put them in a tough spot because you have Tez Walker, who they drafted in the 4th round as kind of like a deep threat. Nelson Aguilar, we know who he is at this point. He's a guy who can be effective at certain spots, but you don't want to have to rely on him. And then Tylan Wallace, he just hasn't played a lot. I liked him coming out of Oklahoma State. He was very productive at Oklahoma State, but they haven't given him more than I saw this stat earlier. I don't have it in front of me at the moment. I don't think they have given him more than 100 snaps in a season since he's been in the NFL. So that could be something, but can't rely on that either. So it's got to be Rashad Bateman.
Absolutely. Um, he's got to be a dude for this offense. You know, he had 32 catches a year ago, but it just seemed like at times him and Lamar Jackson haven't been on the same page. He needs to aim for a more consistent offensive role. They have to have a number 2 wide receiver emerge behind Zay Flowers, whether that's Rashad Bateman or maybe even a guy like Tez Walker, maybe, but also like Isaiah Likely, who they've used in the past. I think it will help, presumably, that Mark Andrews is hopefully going to be healthy for a full season this year, and he's one of Lamar's top targets when he's been healthy. So that helps a little bit, but it's got to be Rashad Bateman. It just has to be. And then if you were to pick something else offensively, I think it would be, I mean, we said this for a lot of teams. This is just the nature of the NFL, but the tackle situation, right? I mean, you're replacing three starters on the offensive line, but it's going to be Ronnie Stanley on one side, right at left tackle, and he's had his fair share of injury issues. He's missed 38 games over the last 4 years. So that's a concern. And then you're likely relying upon Roger Rosengarten, a rookie out of Washington, who's a second-round pick at right tackle, from what I've gathered. So that's an X factor, absolutely. And then defensively, it's got to be the coaching staff, right?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, their defensive coordinator, let me pull it. Zach Orr. Zach Orr is who they hired as their defensive coordinator. Not a whole lot of coaching experience, but
Yeah.
did play in the NFL for the Ravens. He's only 32 years old, and in order for him to have earned the trust of John Harbaugh, like there's obviously something that he's shown in his short time as a NFL coach. So I'm gonna give them the benefit of the doubt, but it's also Mike McDonald as a defensive coordinator was masterful last season. So will that have a slight drop off? We'll see.
Yeah, and it's Zach Orr, but it's also everything else that happened to this defensive coaching
Right.
staff.
Right.
It's the fact that Mike McDonald, who's really the architect of the defense, is now in Seattle as the head coach. And not only that, but Anthony Weaver, who's been the defensive line coach, is now defensive coordinator in Miami. And Denard Wilson, who was their defensive backs coach,
Yeah.
is a defensive coordinator in Tennessee. So that's a good thing in the sense that people are really looking at, like, they've looked at this Ravens defense the past couple of years and they're like, we want some of that. Whatever they're doing over there, we want that.
Yeah.
But it's also maybe not a bad thing, but it's just something they'll have to figure out early on in the season with this new staff that they have on hand. Because I think the personnel is still there on defense. They're a little young in the secondary, but and I do think the edge rushers away and goodness,
Ojabo.
yeah, those could be like them having one of those two guys having a bigger season and emerging could be an X factor. But just overall, defensively, like their personnel, the coaching staff is where some of the mysteries, the questions that we need to be answered and will have answered, are on the defensive side of the football. So, with that being said, we've eliminated our over under win total segment from our previews for the last 14s because next Tuesday we're going to do a season prediction show, which will really show you guys where we stand and how we think these teams are going to perform in terms of wins and losses in the regular season. So instead, we're going to do something else, and I'll let Emmy explain.
Right. So instead, we're going to be giving team awards or predicted team awards. So 3 awards. It's going to be team MVP, just the most valuable player on the team, simple enough. And then breakout player and best rookie. So we're going to start out with best rookie. Who on this team stands out to you out of the rookies uh, as the guy?
Um, Best rookie.
Here, I'll give you mine. I'll give you mine. For me, it's Nate Wiggins. I think from what he's shown so far in camp and in the preseason, I think he's going to be an absolute stud across from Marlon Humphrey. And if he's, all that we thought he was coming out, just as a guy who has elite movement skills and is a little skinny, but is ultra competitive and isn't just going to back down from anybody. Like, I think he fits this Ravens team perfectly. I think the one question you might have is just tackling with his build. But I don't think that'll be too big of an issue year one.
Yeah, he's the most glaring choice for best rookie. I think he's actually competing with Brandon Stevens, who's in the final year of his contract at the corner opposite of Marlon Humphrey, but he's going to play a lot. And I just think with Roger Rosengarten maybe having some struggles early on at right tackle, if he even starts there. Adisa Isaac is a guy that they drafted as an edge rusher, but they have Kyle Van Noy, they have Owe, they have Ojabo. His path to playing time could be kind of impeded a little bit just because there's a lot of competition on the edge. I don't really see like a Tez Walker or any of these other rookies, even a TJ Tampa, having the kind of impact that I think Nate Wiggins is going to have. So we'll go Nate Wiggins. Now, in terms of breakout players, who did you have in mind for your breakout player for the Ravens?
So my breakout player, I actually have a offensive lineman in mind. Andrew Voorhees at left guard. They drafted him in the fourth round last year because of a season-ended injury that he suffered in college, and so that they knew he would miss the entirety of last season. They drafted him knowing that, but I think he's going to step in and be a really solid player right away. Um, in fact, I was at the time kind of surprised he fell all the way to the fourth round. To be honest, like I just think he was a guy I wouldn't have minded the Cowboys taking in the late second round or even the third round. I just think he's going to be really solid right out of the gate.
Yeah, that's a good one. I'll go chalk. I'll go Rashad Bateman. I think he'll
Okay.
break out for them this year at receiver. Because they need him to. In
Yeah.
terms of
Heather.
MVP Lamar Jackson. Is that too simple?
Um, no, I think it's valid. With everything he brings to the table, and obviously they've got offensive line questions, but the
Yeah,
fact that they have Lamar Jackson makes you think like, oh, like regardless of the offensive line questions, the running lanes are going to be huge because of who Lamar Jackson is and how much of a threat he is. So just based on that, and you add in his development as a passer, I mean,
yeah,
it's pretty self-explanatory. But if I were to choose a non-quarterback on this team, I'm kind of tempted to choose Kyle Hamilton.
yeah. That would be the other one that you would look at. He's a monster.
Yeah, he's
Lamar
ridiculous.
Jackson, though, I just don't know how you can be the most valuable player in the league and then not be the most valuable player on your own team.
Yeah,
Uh, since 2019, the Ravens are 52-18 in the regular season when Jackson starts. When he doesn't, they're 4-9. So it's pretty simple. They've been good for a 12.6 win average over the last 5 years. So they're damn good, and that lot has to do with Lamar Jackson. Last year, he averaged a career high 8 yards per attempt, a 5.3% touchdown rate, added 820 yards on the ground, 5 touchdowns, won the MVP. And you wouldn't be all too surprised if he did it again, right? I mean, it's just that kind of player, special.
yeah, especially
So,
with the first place schedule that they have, he's going to have to be great again. One thing I will say on Lamar though, before we move on, is just he's got to clean up the fumbles. Um, I think he had 11 fumbles last year. He didn't lose all of them,
yeah,
but 11 is a lot. And I think the other stat that I wanted to mention is his time to throw was the highest of his career at 3.1
mm.
time to throw, which was
3.1
third
seconds.
highest, third highest among starting quarterbacks, just
Yeah,
behind Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. So,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Tell me about that. All right. Um,
yeah.
uh, yeah. Okay. What was I gonna say? Oh, we're not doing the over/under win total prediction right now, but in case you're curious, the over/under win total for the Ravens this year is 11.5. So
Oh, wow.
just so you
That's
guys
high.
know. San Francisco, Emmy. Let's recap the 49ers last year. What did they do last year?
Oh, boy. Okay. So the Niners made it to the Super Bowl
Yep,
and
they did
were,
that.
I mean, they were exactly who we thought they were. The one big thing to me was just how good Brock Purdy was from the jump,
Yep,
coming off his arm basically collapsing.
yep.
And
Disintegrating.
based on what I've read, he
Mm-hmm.
was still doing rehab on that arm all the way up until Thanksgiving. So
Oh,
for him to play as good as he did and be in the MVP race and all of that and run the offense the way he did, I think there's reason to believe he could even take a step forward again this year. But back to last year, though, Brandon Ayuk had a breakout season, played at a top five wide receiver type of level, which on this offense just made it that much more ridiculous to stop. Um, the offensive line, the thing that we cited as a possible point of concern before the season, I thought they did a fantastic job of kind of managing that. It wasn't like a great offensive line, but it wasn't a bad unit either. Brock Purdy got the ball out quick, and Kyle Shanahan was. I thought he did a really good job of planning out game plans to hide their weak spots on the offensive line. So um, the defense was great as always, and they won a lot of football games.
Yeah, before last season, and this has kind of been a recurring storyline with the 49ers year after year. It was, can we please get a year when the 49ers stay healthy?
Yeah,
And what would that look like if that happened? Well, I don't know how they do these metrics, but it's games missed or something. But Kyle Shanahan, since he became the head coach in San Francisco back in 2017 ish, each year up until last year, 2017, they were the 10th most injured team. 2018, they were the fourth most injured team. 2019, they were the sixth most injured team. 2020, they were the most injured team, flat out, number one. 2021, they were the number three most injured team. And 2022, 2 years ago, they were the number nine most injured team. Now, that's impressive considering they went to a Super Bowl in that span and you know, they've had a lot of regular season success. They've been a really good football team aside for the first couple of years of Kyle Shanahan's tenure in San Francisco, one of the best teams in the NFL. Last year, though, the fortunes changed a little bit. They were the fourth healthiest team, according to this metric, last year. So the luck swung back in their direction a little bit, which was good. But you still kind of worry about it, of course, as with any team going into the season. But overall, man, like this has been the kind of top dog in the NFC for a while now. They've been to 3 Super Bowls in 12 years, but what is it? 2 Super Bowls in the last 4 years. And I think it's 3 NFC championship games, something like that. And you look at this roster with the additions of Christian McCaffrey and the weapons they have offensively and the Kyle Shanahan factor and the defense that's loaded. It's a good team, really good team. And they still reign supreme until they don't. But there was a lot that went on in the offseason that, as you said, like, you can make an argument both of these teams that we're talking about tonight got a little worse in the offseason. And if this whole situation with Brandon Ayuk doesn't work itself out here pretty soon, I'm getting tired of it. What does that mean for their team, going into the season? So we'll see, but let's go ahead and jump into their offseason.
right. So their off season, the main, I guess, point to make with their off season is they kind of overhauled their defensive line a little bit in terms of depth. Their
Yeah.
mainstays, Nick Bosa and Javon Hargrave, still there, but Leonard Floyd, they brought him in. Yeturgos Matos, new guy as
Mm-hmm.
well. Malik Collins, they brought in from the Cowboys, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
kind of a new unit there.
Yep.
They've been year over year one of the deepest units in the league on that defensive line. So that'll be interesting to see how that goes this year with that group, those changes. And then I think the pickup that I want to point out is Ricky Pearsall in the first
Yeah.
round. I really liked him as a prospect.
Yep.
I didn't have him ahead of a guy like A.D. Mitchell, for example, but
Right.
I do think he fits into what the 49ers want to do. I think he
Yeah.
has a very similar skill set
Mm-hmm.
to a guy like Brandon Ayuk. I think it's just
Mm-hmm.
going to depend on, you know, how much they're actually going to have to rely on him now. It's just
Yes.
right now, it's looking at Brandon Ayuk is going to play week 1. But if he doesn't, and they're going to have to rely on Ricky Pearsall to be their number 2 or number 3 guy,
Mhm.
then that changes things a little bit.
Yeah. I think when you look at the 49ers offseason, the key loss in my eyes was Eric Armstead, um, who was, he was released before his 10th, what would be his 10th season. Um, Injuries kind of hindered him a little bit the past 2 years. He was unwilling to accept a pay cut that the 49ers offered him, and so he went elsewhere. I don't actually remember his destination. Do you
I think
know?
it was Jacksonville.
Jacksonville sounds about right. I can't keep everything straight.
Yeah.
But Leonard Floyd stands out as an off-season addition just because he's a veteran. Uh, and he's been good. The question with him is like, does he have enough left in the tank to be an every down menace on the edge, or is he primarily at this point kind of just a pass rush specialist? And if he's that, then who else is filling in on that side on the edge? They brought in Gross Matos. They have some other guys there, but Leonard Floyd seems to be the guy that they're counting on the most.
Yeah.
And then Ricky Pearsall, just watch his highlights at Florida, and that really tells you all you need to know about Ricky Pearsall. I think he fits what this offense wants to do. He just never really consistently showed off the traits during his career at Arizona State and Florida, but he's a really good football player. They drafted Renardo Green, who's coming off a fantastic season at, I believe, Florida State. He's a corner. They had some interesting, draft picks, but those are probably the ones that stand out the most to me. Of course, this Brandon Ayuk contract situation kind of sticks out like a thorn in their side, kind of a dark cloud hovering over them as they go into the regular season. But and it honestly is frustrating because like it seems like it's just one or two things that need to be agreed upon and they can work this contract out in a matter of seconds. Like I'm surprised the CeeDee Lamb deal got worked out before the Ayuk deal, as long as the Ayuk deal has been, in the news. But anyways, like that's kind of that. I think the more interesting conversation around the 49ers is like, what has to happen for this team to get over the hump? What do
Yeah.
they need to do to actually win the damn Super Bowl?
Well, I think that all starts with Brock Purdy.
Yeah.
I think Brock Purdy would even tell you himself he didn't play as good as he would have liked to in the Super Bowl. And that's not to say he played bad. He didn't play bad. But he definitely did miss some throws that he wouldn't typically miss. And there's no question about that. I think that's where you got to start. And then from there, it's just you gotta have your superstars play like superstars in the big moments. And it seems like the 49ers have been able to have that
Mm-hmm.
at a pretty decent level. They had some unluckiness, I guess, in the Super Bowl with one of their mainstays on defense, Drake Greenlaw, going down um, with that torn Achilles. I think it wasn't even on a play. I think he was just running out onto the field and he
Yeah.
tore it.
Yeah.
Um,
Unfortunately.
so yeah, really unfortunate there. But you just gotta not play Patrick Mahomes, I guess.
Basically, yeah. I mean, hey, that's what they really gotta they gotta try to do, and it's not in
Yeah.
their control, unfortunately, because number 15 will probably end up being there more likely than not.
Yeah.
Uh, you're right. I mean, Dre Greenlaw goes down with the Achilles tear, uh, non-contact, totally like a flukish injury, just totally unfortunate for him. They did sign Devondre Campbell in free agency, who's kind of maybe like a temporary placeholder
Right.
for Greenlaw. Campbell was an All Pro back in 2021. Um, I don't know too much about him, but solid player. They have Fred Warner, right? I mean,
Yeah.
he's unquestionably like maybe the best linebacker in football. We've known that for years. Uh, it all comes down though to Brock Purdy and health, really, for me. It's he recovered so well from his elbow surgery. He produced one of the greatest seasons uh, in terms of like sheer numbers in franchise history last year. 4,280 yards. First Pro Bowl quarterback for the 49ers since Jeff Garcia in 2002. And in his career, he's been a winner, going back to Iowa State, and he's now won 21 of his first 26 starts in the NFL, including 4-2 in the postseason. But then again, it's like it's $1 million salary, right now. The window of opportunity to capitalize on Brock Purdy's rookie contract is dwindling a little bit. And you still got to figure out what's the future of Trent Williams look like. How much are we going to pay Brandon Ayuk? Are we going to pay Brandon Ayuk? There are other players that they're eventually going to have to, have these conversations with. So I think this year is kind of viewed as like, I don't want to say it's a last dance, but it's like the win. You get what I'm saying? Like
Yeah. It kind
it's a
of feels
window
that way,
here.
man. It seems like the cap casualties are already hitting, and Brock Purdy's contract hasn't even happened yet. So you're right. Like they probably would have wanted to keep Eric Armstead if they really wanted. Like if they were to choose whether they keep Eric Armstead, they keep Eric Armstead every time. But
Yeah,
they just couldn't.
yeah,
Not to mention George Kittle
yep,
getting a year older, Christian
yep,
McCaffrey getting a year older. Like those are still great players, but the clock is definitely ticking for sure.
yeah. Okay. So who will be their best rookie this year? Is it Pearsall? Is that the simple answer here? Do you think?
I
Or do
have
you
a I have a bit of a wild card answer actually.
okay.
My pick for best rookie for the 49ers
Okay.
is actually going to be Malik Mustafa.
Okay.
Um, he's a guy that I guess found out about from watching my guy TFG. Great channel, by the way, does an
Yeah.
amazing football analysis.
Yeah.
But he had him ready as his number one safety in the class, and from there, I kept an eye on him, saw how he was doing in camp and in the preseason, and he looks really good, man. Now the question on that would just be like, once Talanoa Hufanga comes back, what is his role?
Yeah.
But it's not looking like Hufanga is going to be back in this early part of the season. Like really, at least until like week 8, 9, 10. So there's a chance Malik Mustafa, like dare I say, could be better than Hufanga in coverage a little bit. Like he still brings that physicality and that run stuffing mentality that Hufanga does, but I just think he has a little bit more range and just instincts in coverage. So I really like his potential.
Yeah, that's a sneaky good pick. I like it. I like it. He was a 2 year starter at Wake at Wake Forest at strong safety. Um, really like some of his tools. I think that's a good pick. But I'll roll with Ricky Pearsall. Um, just because I think he's been dealing with some injuries in camp, right? But he projects to be ready for the season. So
Right.
I think they're going to work him into the offense, whether Ayuk's on the field or he's not on the field. And so I'll go with that. But you're right. I mean, there's an opportunity for a guy like Jair Brown or Mustafa to really emerge in the secondary while Hufanga makes his way back from that ACL.
Right.
I haven't thought about this, but breakout player for the Niners. Who do you have in mind?
Hmm. Um. Breakout player. I hadn't given this one a whole ton of thought, in all honesty, but I can't say Malik Mustafa again. I've kind of ruled that out. So I think I'm going to go with Ambry Thomas. Their cornerback, they drafted in the fifth round, I think 2 years ago,
Yeah.
has been really solid up until this point, kind of as a slot um, slot corner in their nickel package. I think he has a chance to really step up to another level this year. He's got all the tools to be able to do so. Um, but it's kind of a shot in the dark pick here. There's not really a whole ton of starters on this team that aren't already established.
Yeah, this guy is kind of established because of what he did in the postseason last
Yeah.
year, but I think in terms of having kind of a career year, that guy could be Jawan Jennings. Um,
Okay. Yeah.
they're one of their receivers, one of their many weapons. I think he had a touchdown pass and a touchdown catch in the Super Bowl. So he really broke out in the Super Bowl. And if Ayuk's not on the field, it'll be, Debo, Jawan Jennings, and likely Ricky Pearsall, along with George Kittle. It's just hard to pick, though, because everyone pretty much is like an established stud on this
Yeah.
team.
Like I'm gonna
So,
pick Nick Bosa as my breakout.
no, like you can't really even pick
Easy.
a guy like, you know, you, you can't really pick a guy like Leonard Floyd or Javon Hargrave. Even those guys are established like studs.
Yeah, veterans
So
at this point.
unless you wanted to, I guess, pick someone on their offensive line to be a breakout, but then it's kind of like, how do you project a offensive line breakout? Is it what do you measure? What's the measuring stick for that? Is it like All Pro, Pro Bowl? I don't know.
Yeah.
MVP. There's a lot of different ways you can go for MVP. Who's your team MVP?
Well, last year the guy that everybody pointed to was Christian McCaffrey,
Yeah,
and for very good reason. But this year, I think it's Brock Purdy, man. I think he's a guy I look at as I still think is underrated in a lot of different ways. Like I just think people look at him, they're like, oh, he's small, he's got a noodle arm, he's just running the Kyle Shanahan offense, and yeah, he's doing that, but he's doing it better than any other Kyle Shanahan quarterback. Like
yeah,
even going back to Atlanta with Matt Ryan, even as good as
sure.
Matt Ryan was in that season, you were not getting the playmaking ability that Brock Purdy brings to the table. Like once the play breaks down, there has not been a quarterback that Kyle Shanahan has coached with that type of playmaking ability to beat you with his arm late in the play.
Yeah.
Even RG3. RG3 kind of was a guy who ran to run, not to throw. So I just think Purdy, I think he's going to establish himself as a true top 10 quarterback this year. Like completely, like consensus.
Yeah, I agree with you. He led all passers in passer rating, yards per pass attempt, EPA per dropback, touchdown rate, and the rate of pass attempts that resulted in a first down or touchdown at 43.2% last year. Um, the only blemish really was his 2.5% interception rate, which ranked 24th. But like in the 49ers environment where they're attacking down the field, he's going to throw some picks. It's going to be a part of it. And I think you'd rather have that with all the success that comes with it. Maybe he throws 10 or 11 interceptions like he did last year, but you're going to get efficiency. You're going to get the playmaking ability. You're going to get, a guy who will run this offense to almost perfection. So I think you're going to see it really come together this year. And if he say they in a hypothetical scenario, say Brandon Ayuk does not play for I don't know a good portion of the season because of the contract, he'll get to make a point of it. Like it doesn't matter who's on the field. I don't need this guy. I don't need this guy. If one guy's hurt, I don't need the perfect situation. I'm good enough as a football player to make it work with what I have. I think you're going to see that from Brock Purdy. So, yeah, I think that's that. Again, the over-under win total for the Niners is the same as the Ravens. It's 11.5, just so you guys know. Anything else on either the Baltimore Ravens, the San Francisco 49ers, or the NFL as a whole before we wrap this thing up?
Well, I think these are two teams that are in really tough divisions.
Yes.
So realistically, they could still both be really good teams and end up third in their division. Like I just think that's the tough draw that you gotta play with. I think the tough thing with the Niners is like, what are they? The question that lingers, I guess, is just what are they when it's 3rd and 13, and they're so rarely in 3rd and 13 that like they don't really have to answer the question until it's January, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah. All right. Is that it?
yeah, that's it in my mind.
Okay. Well, we're, as of tomorrow, 8 days away from kickoff of the regular season. Finally, finally, finally. And we have a full slate of college football this weekend. On Thursday, we'll finish off this series with number 2 and number 1. Y'all will guess it at this point. It's very, very obvious who those teams are, especially if you've been following along. And then we'll also have a Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports episode coming out as well. We'll be talking a lot of week 1 college football and potentially a couple other things in the news. By the way, there's a documentary that was just released on
Yeah.
Netflix, the Connor Stallions Michigan documentary, which I might try to watch between now and then. We'll see. And then next Tuesday, as I mentioned, we're going to have our season predictions show. So maybe y'all make your predictions and we can have a fun dialogue during that episode. And then Sunday, of course, will hopefully be we have a fantasy draft that night, but hopefully we'll be able to do our college football recap. at night. So lots of content coming on the Raw Prospect Podcast YouTube channel. Emmy, I'll let you sign us off.
Yeah. So until next time, when we're possibly doing a fantasy draft live on the show, maybe we'll see about that. But until next time, peace out.